The cabin went quiet the second the cockpit door opened. Not the polite quiet of a plane about to take off, but the sharp kind. The kind that feels like a held breath. Conversations died mid-sentence. A laugh froze in someone's throat. Even the low hum of the engine seemed to pull back as the pilot stepped into the aisle with purpose in his stride and authority in his posture. Passengers looked up as his polished shoes stopped beside a black woman seated in first class. She wasn't slouched. She wasn't nervous. She sat straight, shoulders relaxed, hands folded neatly in her lap. No diamonds catching the light. No designer logos begging for attention. No assistant hovering nearby. Just a tailored coat, clean shoes, and a calm face that had learned long ago how to stay still under pressure. The pilot didn't lower his voice. "Ma'am," he said sharply, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "You need to move to economy. This seat is reserved." The words hit the air like a dropped plate. Sharp, breaking, impossible to ignore. A ripple moved through the cabin. Whispers slid from row to row. Necks craned, eyebrows lifted, some faces twisted with curiosity, others with quiet satisfaction. A few wore that familiar look, the one that said they already knew how this would end. The woman blinked once, slowly, not in shock, not in confusion, more like she was choosing patience. She reached into her bag, pulled out her boarding pass, and handed it to him with steady fingers. No rush, no shake, the kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly who you are, even when the world pretends not to see it. The pilot barely glanced at the paper. "This must be a mistake," he muttered, already handing it back. "First class is for priority passengers." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The pause did the talking, heavy, loud, ugly. Heat rushed to her face. That familiar burn. The one that comes not from embarrassment, but from being reduced, from being seen as out of place without ever being asked who you are. Her heart thudded once, hard against her ribs, but her voice stayed even when she spoke. "That is my assigned seat." Her words were quiet, but they landed. Still no one moved, no one spoke. The flight attendant nearby shifted her weight, eyes darting between them. Her mouth opened, then closed. Whatever she thought better of saying, she swallowed it whole. Silence filled the cabin again, thick now, judgmental. The pilot exhaled through his nose, jaw tightening. "Please don't make this difficult," he said. "We're already delayed. Make this difficult, as if dignity were an inconvenience, as if standing up for yourself were a problem that needed smoothing over." The woman looked around. She saw the way people avoided her eyes, the way some stared too long, the way others leaned back in their seats, relieved it wasn't happening to them. She felt the weight of every unspoken thought pressing down on her shoulders. She stood. Slowly she reached for her bag, lifting it from the overhead bin with careful movements, as if sudden motion might crack whatever fragile piece was left. The aisle seemed longer now, narrower. Every step forward felt heavier than the last. She could feel eyes tracking her. Phones lowered just enough to be discreet. No one wanted proof of this moment, just the memory. Humiliation doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it walks beside you, quiet and close, pretending to be normal. She moved past rows of soft leather and wide seats, past champagne flutes and folded blankets, toward the thin curtain that marked the invisible line between who belonged and who didn't. Each step felt like a small surrender, even though she knew better. Even though she knew the truth. At the curtain, she stopped. The plane seemed to lean forward with her. She turned back and met the pilot's eyes, really met them. Not pleading, not angry, just steady. In that moment, something unreadable crossed her face. Not fear, not resentment, something deeper, something settled, certainty. She knew who she was. She knew what she owned. She knew what this moment would become. The pilot didn't notice. He was already turning away, already convinced the problem had been handled, already moving on. She stepped through the curtain and into economy, the fabric brushing her shoulder like a final insult. The seats were tighter. The air felt thinner somehow. She found her row and sat, placing her bag at her feet. Around her, people pretended not to look. A man shifted uncomfortably. A woman across the aisle offered a small, apologetic smile, then looked away. The plane doors closed with a dull thud. That sound sealed it, not just the flight, but the mistake. As the aircraft began to taxi, the woman rested her head back against the seat and closed her eyes for a brief moment. Not to escape, to remember, to center herself, to hold on to the part of her that no uniform, no title, no raised voice could ever take. Up front, the pilot laughed at something the CO pilot said. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. Safety instructions crackled over the speakers. Everything moved forward smooth and ordinary, as if nothing at all had happened. But something quiet, something heavy, something that would not stay buried. Because when you force someone to walk down an aisle like that, when you mistake silence for weakness and dignity for compliance, you don't just move a person. You set a chain of moments into motion. And at 30,000 feet, with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide, the truth has a way of catching up. The woman opened her eyes as the plane lifted off the ground, her expression calm, unreadable, resolute. The pilot had no idea who was sitting behind that curtain. Not yet. The economy seat felt smaller the moment she sat down, not just in size, but in presence. The armrests pressed in too close. The legroom barely existed. The air felt louder here, filled with coughing, shifting bodies, the rustle of bags and impatience. Somewhere behind her, a tray table slammed shut. Somewhere ahead, someone sighed too loudly. It wasn't just a different section of the plane, it was a different world. She settled into the seat without complaint, placed her bag carefully at her feet, folded her hands again just like before. From the outside she looked calm, almost untouched. But inside her mind moved fast. Not with anger, not with bitterness, with memory. Glass boardrooms flooded her thoughts. Long tables polished so smooth they reflected faces back at themselves. Late nights where decisions were made that shifted companies, changed jobs, moved money across borders. She remembered men twice her age leaning forward when she spoke, remembered silence filling rooms because what she said mattered. She remembered power, real power, the kind no uniform could give or take away. And now this. Now she was just another black woman in economy, just another body someone decided didn't fit where it sat. Up front, laughter drifted back from behind the curtain. The pilot's voice carried easily, careless and loose now that the problem, as he saw it, was gone. "People try anything these days," he scoffed. "You can tell who really belongs if you pay attention." The words landed like a slap, even from a distance. A few passengers nearby heard it too. Some smirked. Others shifted uncomfortably. No one said anything. Silence, once again, did its quiet damage. A woman in the seat beside her leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "You okay?" she whispered, eyes soft but unsure, as if afraid even concern might be noticed. The woman turned and met her gaze, offered a small smile. "I've been through worse," she said. It was true, but that didn't make this easier. The plane jerked suddenly as turbulence rattled the cabin. A child cried somewhere near the back. A man complained loudly about legroom. A flight attendant rushed past, gripping a seat for balance. Life continued the way it always does, unbothered, unaware. Injustice folded neatly into the background noise. She looked out the small window beside her. Clouds rolled by, endless and indifferent. She wondered how many times she'd been underestimated in rooms like this, how many times she'd been misjudged before someone bothered to listen. She wondered how many people on this plane carried stories no one ever asked to hear. Time passed strangely. Minutes stretched. Her body stayed still, but the air felt charged, like something unfinished hovered above them all. Then footsteps returned, quick, uneven. The same flight attendant from earlier stopped near the front of economy, her face drained of color. She leaned toward the cockpit curtain, voice low but urgent. "Captain, there's an issue." "What now?" The pilot snapped, irritation sharp even through fabric. The attendant swallowed. "The aircraft registration. It's flagged. The owner is on board." The laughter stopped. Inside the cockpit, something shifted. The pilot froze, one hand still resting on the edge of his seat. "That's impossible," he said. "The owner flies private." The attendant didn't argue. She didn't need to. Not today. Silence followed, heavy, different from before. This silence wasn't judging. It was afraid. The pilot stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. He pushed past the curtain and into the aisle, posture stiff, face tight. He walked quickly at first, jaw clenched, annoyance still leading his steps. But as he moved farther back, as his eyes scanned faces row by row, irritation gave way to something else, unease. He looked at business travelers, at families, at teenagers with headphones on, at elderly couples holding hands. Then his gaze landed on her. She looked up at him calmly. No surprise, no fear, just a steady waiting presence. As if she'd known this moment would come, as if she'd been expecting him. The aisle felt narrower again. The noise of the cabin dimmed. Conversations slowed. People noticed the change in his face, the way his confidence cracked just enough to show something human underneath. He stopped beside her row. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was different now. Lower, careful, stripped of authority. "May I speak with you?" The question hung in the air, not demanded. Asked. She didn't answer right away. She looked at him for a beat longer than necessary, long enough for him to feel it, long enough for the power to tilt, just slightly. Then she stood. The movement drew eyes like gravity. People leaned forward in their seats. Someone gasped quietly. The woman beside her straightened, heart pounding. The plane seemed to hold its breath again, but this time it wasn't anticipation of humiliation. It was anticipation of truth. "Yes," she replied, "you may." Her voice was calm, still, unmoved by the shift happening around her. She stepped into the aisle, meeting him at eye level. Not smaller, not lesser, equal. He swallowed hard. Behind him, the flight attendant hovered, hands clasped, face tense. Around them, passengers watched openly now. No more pretending. No more phones lowered in shame. Something was unfolding, and everyone could feel it. The pilot gestured toward the front. "If you'd come with me," he said quietly. She didn't move yet. She looked around first, at the people who had watched her walk this aisle before, at the ones who'd stayed silent, at the ones who'd assumed. Then she nodded once and stepped forward. As they walked, the aisle felt different than it had before. Still narrow, still crowded, but now it wasn't carrying humiliation. It was carrying expectation. Something unresolved pulled tight behind them like a wire ready to snap. She followed him toward the curtain, her posture straight, her steps measured. Each footfall echoed with unspoken questions. Each second stretched the tension further, because everyone on that plane could feel it now. Whatever had been done wasn't over. Whatever had been assumed was about to be exposed. And somewhere between economy and first class, beneath the ceiling of power and pride, the truth was preparing to speak. The galley was smaller than it looked from the outside. Tight, bright, nowhere to hide. The pilot stood there with the tablet in his hands, staring at the screen as if it might change if he looked away long enough. His fingers trembled. Not from the turbulence, from the name. It was right there, clear, impossible to misread. Her name, the founder, the majority owner, the woman whose signature sat at the bottom of his employment contract, the reason the plane existed at all, the reason he wore those polished shoes and that crisp uniform, the reason his career had ever taken flight. He swallowed hard. Sweat gathered at his temple and slid slowly down his face. His mouth opened once, closed again. When he finally spoke, the words barely came out. I didn't know. The woman stood across from him, hands folded again, posture calm. She didn't smile. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't reach for the power he'd just handed her. She studied him the way a teacher looks at a student who should have known better. Not with anger, with disappointment. "You didn't need to know who I was," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't sharp. It was steady, certain. "You only needed to treat me like I belonged." The words landed heavier than any accusation could have. They filled the small space between them, pressing against his chest, making it hard to breathe. He nodded, eyes dropping to the floor. For the first time, the uniform didn't make him taller. Outside the galley, the cabin buzzed. News moves fast in small spaces. Whispers slid across rows like sparks. People leaned into aisles, craning their necks, eyes wide. The same faces that had watched her walk in silence now stared in disbelief. Awe replaced judgment. Curiosity replaced comfort. "That's her," someone whispered. "No way," another breathed. Phones came out again, not to hide this time, but to capture it, to prove it happened, to prove they'd been there when the truth stepped into the light. The pilot cleared his throat, his hands still shaking. "I owe you an apology," he said, publicly. She met his eyes, held them, then nodded once. They stepped out into the aisle together. The curtain was pulled back. Every seat faced them now. The cabin, once loud with whispers, fell silent again. But this silence was different. It wasn't judgment, it was attention. The pilot stood in front of the cabin, shoulders squared but no longer proud. His voice cracked as he spoke. "I made an assumption," he said. "I was wrong. And I humiliated someone who deserved respect." The words echoed, hung there. No excuse followed, no justification, just truth. Silence stretched. Then murmurs rippled through the plane. Not laughter, not applause, something heavier, shame. The kind that settles in your stomach when you realize you were complicit by doing nothing. The pilot turned to her, eyes wet now. "Please," he said softly, "return to your seat in first class." Every head turned toward her. She stepped forward. The aisle felt different under her feet this time, straighter, lighter, no weight pulling her down, no eyes daring her to prove herself. Each step carried a quiet authority that didn't need permission. She reached the first-class row she'd been forced to leave. The seat waited, untouched, open, an invitation, but she didn't sit. "I won't," she said. The words cut through the cabin. "I'll stay here," she continued, gesturing slightly. "But this conversation isn't over." A sharp inhale moved through the plane. The pilot froze. His mouth opened, then closed. He swallowed hard. Power shifted in that moment. Not with a title, not with a bank balance, with truth, with restraint, with a choice. She turned to the passengers, her voice carrying now, calm and clear. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone," she said. "I came here to remind us that dignity doesn't come with a seat number." People looked away. Others nodded. Some wiped at their eyes without knowing why. The pilot stood beside her, smaller now, but listening. Truly listening. "I built this company," she continued, her tone steady, "because I believed in opportunity, in fairness, in seeing people before judging them. Today, I was reminded how far we still have to go." She turned back to him. "You're not losing your job today," she said. His breath caught. "But you are gaining a responsibility." He nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't ever let your authority make you forget your humanity," she said. "Because uniforms come off, titles fade, but how you treat people stays with them." The cabin was silent again, deep, heavy, changed. She turned and walked back toward economy. This time, people made space. They stood to let her pass. Eyes lowered not in judgment, but in respect. The woman who had whispered to her earlier reached out, squeezing her hand as she passed. She sat back in her seat, the same small space, the same tight legroom, but it didn't feel the same anymore. Up front, the pilot returned to the cockpit slowly. He sat down, hands resting on his knees, staring ahead. The sky outside the windshield looked different now, wider, less forgiving. Behind him, the cabin carried the weight of what had just happened. People replayed the moment in their minds, the assumption, the silence, the correction. Because they'd all learned something at 30,000 feet. That power doesn't always announce itself, that dignity doesn't beg, and that sometimes the name that changes everything isn't spoken to elevate one person, it's spoken to humble everyone else. The plane continued its course through the clouds, but nothing inside it was the same anymore. The wheels touched the runway with a long, steady thud, and the cabin let out a breath it didn't know it had been holding. Seatbelts clicked open. Overhead bins popped. Voices returned slowly, cautiously, like a room after a hard conversation. But something lingered in the air, something heavier than travel fatigue, something that didn't end when the plane stopped moving. The pilot stood near the exit as passengers filed out. He didn't rush. He didn't hide in the cockpit. The uniform was still crisp, but the man inside it was different now. The sharp edges were gone. No arrogance, no authority to lean on, just a man standing still, waiting to face himself. She approached last, unhurried, calm, the same calm she had carried the entire flight. When she reached him, he looked at her fully this time, not past her, not through her, at her. "I built my life believing authority made me better," he said quietly. His voice wasn't shaking now. It was tired, honest. "Today I learned how small that made me." People slowed their steps nearby. No one interrupted. Some listened openly. Others pretended not to, but every word landed. She held his gaze. There was no anger left there. No need to prove anything. "Titles don't define worth," she said. "Character does." The words were simple, plain, but they settled deep. He nodded once, as if accepting something long overdue. She stepped past him and onto the jet bridge, sunlight spilling in through the windows. The airport buzzed with its usual noise, but she moved through it untouched. No cameras, no interviews, no statements. She disappeared into the crowd the same way she had boarded the plane. Quietly. Weeks passed. Inside the company, change didn't come with speeches. It came with action. New policies, mandatory bias training. Real accountability, not the kind written to protect reputations, but the kind meant to change behavior. Promotions were no longer based on charm or confidence alone, but on how people treated those beneath them, how they listened, how they corrected themselves. The pilot stayed, not protected, not quietly punished to make an example. He stayed and did the work, sat through the training, faced uncomfortable truths, learned to pause where he used to assume, learned to listen where he used to command. It wasn't easy, growth rarely is, but it was real. Some days he replayed that walk down the aisle in his mind, the sound of his own voice, the way silence had backed him up, the way he had mistaken power for rightness. Those memories stayed with him, not as shame alone, but as a compass. And the woman? She never spoke publicly about the incident. She didn't post about it, didn't give interviews, didn't turn it into a moment. She didn't need applause. She didn't need validation. Her power was never in exposure. It was in restraint. She returned to her work, to meetings and decisions and responsibilities. No one on that plane could have guessed. She carried the lesson forward quietly, shaping systems the same way she always had, with intention, with care, with an understanding of how easily people are overlooked. The passengers carried the story with them too. A man told it to his daughter weeks later, explaining why silence can hurt as much as words. A woman remembered it the next time she saw someone being dismissed and chose to speak up. A flight attendant replayed the moment whenever she felt pressure to look away. It became a quiet reminder, a whisper in the back of the mind every time someone judged too fast. Every time, comfort felt safer than courage, because dignity doesn't ask permission. It doesn't come with a boarding pass or a title or a seat assignment. It exists before all of that, and it demands to be seen. That flight didn't end with applause or headlines. It ended with something better. Awareness, accountability, change that didn't need an audience. And the greatest lesson at 30,000 feet wasn't about wealth or status. It was this: never decide someone's value based on where they sit, because life has a way of revealing who truly owns the plane.